A German pilot steps onto an American airfield. The plane waiting for him is a P-51 Mustang, the same fighter that had hunted down his comrades for years. But this time, he is not the target. He is the pilot. And no one forced him to be here. He volunteered. For over 30 years, this story stayed locked away in Pentagon files, too sensitive for the public. What you are about to hear questions everything we think we know about loyalty, betrayal, and professional respect in wartime. This is the story of Hans Werner Leers, and how a death sentence became the beginning of a secret partnership that helped shape the future of aviation. To understand why this story is so extraordinary, we need to go back to December 1944. The Third Reich is crumbling. Hitler's last great gamble, the Ardennes offensive, what we call the Battle of the Bulge, has just failed. German cities are burning under Allied bombs, and the once feared Luftwaffe is a shadow of its former self. Yet, among the surviving German pilots are men with unmatched skill, aces who have flown since the first days of the war, who have survived when most of their comrades have been shot down. Hans Leers was one of these men. Born in 1914, he had joined the Luftwaffe in the early 1930s, when Germany was secretly rebuilding its military power. By 1944, he was no ordinary pilot. Leers was Germany's top test pilot, a man trusted with flying the Reich's most advanced and secret aircraft, including the Me-262 jet fighter, the world's first operational jet. He was known for his calm under pressure and his ability to push aircraft to their limits. But on a freezing morning in December 1944, his war was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. December 14, 1944, Leers takes off in a Messerschmitt Bf 109, the workhorse fighter that had carried the Luftwaffe since the Spanish Civil War. This is not a combat sortie. He is on a test flight, evaluating modifications that could keep Germany's dwindling air force in the fight just a little longer. He climbs, levels out, and begins his routine checks. And then it happens. Disaster. The engine coughs once, then dies. His propeller spins freely in the icy wind. There is no power. In that instant, every decision he makes will decide whether he lives or dies. He could try to glide back toward German lines, risking a crash in friendly territory. He could bail out and hope to land near Wehrmacht units. But Leers does something that will puzzle historians for decades. He points his powerless aircraft toward enemy territory, toward American lines. Why? The official records are still partly classified, but we know from his later memoirs that Leers feared something worse than capture. If he crashed in a German village, he risked killing civilians. If he ejected over German troops, he might be mistaken for a deserter and executed on the spot. And somewhere, deep inside, Hans Leers must have known the war was already lost. The Americans, he reasoned, would follow the Geneva Convention. He would live. The Bf 109 glides silently over the front lines and comes down in a field behind American positions. Soldiers rush to the scene, weapons drawn. What they find astonishes them. A nearly intact German test aircraft, and in the cockpit, alive, one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced pilots. Protocol is clear. Enemy pilots are taken into custody, interrogated for intelligence, and then shipped to POW camps in the American interior. That is exactly what happens at first. But when American intelligence officers discover who they have captured, everything changes. This is not just another downed fighter jockey. This man has flown every secret German plane in existence. He knows their strengths, their weaknesses, their flaws. He might even hold information that could end the air war faster. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Watson is called in. Watson is no ordinary officer. He is one of America's leading test pilots, tasked with evaluating captured German aircraft at Wright Field. From the moment he meets Leers, he senses this is not a typical prisoner. The interrogation begins as usual, but what was meant to last 72 hours stretches to 3 weeks. Watson would later write that these were some of the most fascinating conversations of his military career. Hans Leers is not defiant. He is not a fanatic. He is calm, professional, almost eager to talk about aviation. He explains not just how German aircraft perform, but why they were designed that way. He shares the philosophy behind Luftwaffe tactics, the trade-offs German engineers made, the problems they were trying to solve. Watson is stunned. Here, sitting across from him, is a man who knows more about German aviation than any intelligence report could ever reveal. And that is when Watson has an idea that will shock everyone, including Leers. What if, He asks his superiors, "We let him fly our planes? What if we don't just interrogate him, but actually use his expertise to evaluate our own aircraft?" The idea seems impossible. The security risks are enormous. Allowing an enemy pilot access to American fighters would break every rule in the book. But Watson persists. The request goes all the way to the Pentagon. For 23 tense days, the debate rages. And then, in February 1945, an extraordinary decision comes down. The Americans will do it, but under strict conditions. Lears will remain a prisoner of war, but will be housed in comfortable quarters at Wright Field. He will only be allowed to fly aircraft the Germans have already encountered in combat. Every flight will be closely monitored. And most importantly, he must agree voluntarily. If he refuses, he will be treated like any other POW. When Watson presents the offer to Lears, there is silence. For 10 long minutes, he says nothing. The room is so quiet that Watson can hear the ticking of the wall clock. Later, Lears would describe this as one of the hardest decisions of his life. To accept would mean actively assisting the enemy. But it would also mean flying again, doing the work he loved, and perhaps saving his own life from years in a prison camp. Finally, Lears speaks. He will do it, but he has conditions of his own. The winter wind cut across the tarmac as Hans Lears walked toward the waiting P-51 Mustang. Its silver fuselage gleamed under the pale Ohio sun, the white star of the U.S. Army Air Forces painted proudly on its side. For a man who had spent years fighting against these aircraft, the moment was surreal. Just months earlier, these machines had been the enemy, hunters that escorted bombers over German skies and shot down many of his comrades. Now he was about to climb into one willingly. The irony was not lost on him or on the Americans watching from the edge of the airstrip. The ground crew prepared the Mustang with a precision that impressed Lears immediately. In Germany by late 1944, maintenance crews were overworked, undertrained, and struggling with a shortage of spare parts. Here he saw clean tools, well-oiled engines, and men who worked with quiet confidence. Every nut and bolt seemed perfectly maintained. It was as if the Americans were showing him not just their aircraft, but their entire philosophy of war. He climbed the ladder, slid into the cockpit, and ran his hands across the controls. The Mustang smelled of fuel, oil, and leather, but also of something he had almost forgotten: abundance. The instruments were clear and bright, everything neatly arranged, nothing worn or broken. It felt like stepping into a brand new machine built purely for performance. Watson climbed onto the wing and looked down at him. "Remember," he said, "you are still under guard. If you try anything, you won't get far." Lears nodded. There was no need for threats. He wasn't here to escape. He was here to fly. The Merlin engine roared to life, smooth and powerful, and for a moment Lears forgot where he was. He taxied to the runway under armed escort, opened the throttle, and felt the Mustang surge forward. The tail lifted, the wheels left the ground, and suddenly he was airborne, flying an aircraft designed to defeat everything he had spent years defending. For 2 hours he tested the plane. Climbing, diving, banking, hard to feel its response. He noted its stability, its speed, its ability to hold energy through turns. When he landed and climbed out, the American test pilots were waiting, their notebooks ready. They were eager to hear what the German ace thought of their prized fighter. Lears was direct, as always. "Your engineers have solved problems we didn't even know we had," he told them. The Mustang, he explained, was not just fast, it was forgiving, stable, capable of flying long distances without exhausting the pilot. "We built aircraft for short battles," he said. "You built aircraft to fight all day." Over the following weeks, Lears flew nearly every frontline American fighter: the rugged P-47 Thunderbolt, the twin-engined P-38 Lightning, even an early version of the jet-powered P-80 Shooting Star. Each flight was monitored, each evaluation carefully recorded. And each time, his comments revealed something the Americans had not fully understood about their own planes. When he flew the P-47, he immediately identified why German pilots had struggled against it. "Your aircraft can take punishment that would kill one of ours," he said. "Our fighters are light and fast, but fragile. When we fought P-47s, we tried to win quickly. If we failed, we had to retreat. Your pilots could stay in the fight long after we had to break off. The intelligence pouring out of these flights was priceless. It confirmed American strengths, exposed German weaknesses, and helped refine tactics for the final months of the war. But what no one outside a handful of officers knew, what would stay buried in Pentagon files for more than 3 decades, was that Hans Lehrs had not simply been captured by chance. In 1978, declassified Luftwaffe records revealed the shocking truth. The engine failure that brought down Lehrs' Bf-109 over American lines was no accident. He had sabotaged his own aircraft. Somewhere in late 1944, after watching Germany collapse and seeing the futility of further fighting, Lehrs had made a choice. He loosened a critical engine component just enough to ensure failure at altitude, then set off on his test flight. His plan was simple and dangerous. Fake a mechanical failure, glide into American territory and surrender. If the Americans shot him down as he crossed the lines, it would end his war quickly. If they captured him alive, he might find a way to survive, and maybe even keep flying. The Americans suspected the truth almost immediately. Their engineers examined the wreckage and found signs of deliberate tampering. But instead of treating Lehrs as a traitor to his country, they saw an opportunity. Here was a man willing to risk everything to get out of the war, a man who might cooperate not out of fear but out of choice. And that made him valuable. This revelation changed the way Watson and his team viewed him. Lehrs was not a prisoner to be coerced, but a collaborator. Carefully monitored, yes, but trusted enough to be given the controls of some of the most advanced aircraft in the world. And as the weeks passed, something remarkable began to happen. The American pilots at Wright Field, who had first viewed him with suspicion, began to respect him. They saw that he flew every mission with skill and professionalism. He never tried to escape, never endangered a flight. After each landing, he offered honest, detailed assessments that helped improve their own understanding of combat aviation. For Lehrs, too, something was changing. Nazi propaganda had painted the Americans as crude, undisciplined, technically inferior. But here he found skilled pilots, disciplined engineers, and a system that valued his expertise, even though he had been their enemy. In private moments, he admitted this was a shock to him. "I had been told that Americans were careless," he later wrote. "But their ground crews, their pilots, their machines, everything was superior to what I had known." It was humbling. Friendship began to grow between Watson and Lehrs. They would spend hours after flights discussing not just aircraft performance, but the future of aviation itself. The two men were test pilots first and soldiers second, and they understood each other in ways that transcended the war. But time was running out. In Europe, Allied armies were closing in on Berlin. In April 1945, Hitler would take his own life. On May 8th, Germany officially surrendered. For the world, the war in Europe was over. But for Hans Lehrs, his most dangerous mission was only beginning. Hans sat silently in the dimly lit room, staring at the wooden table in front of him as American officers shuffled papers and whispered to each other. The war in Europe was over. Hitler was dead. The Third Reich had collapsed. Yet here he was, a Luftwaffe officer, not in a prison cell, but in an office deep inside an American airbase, treated more like a consultant than a captive. It felt unreal. When Colonel Watson walked in, Hans stood up instinctively. Watson, tall and composed as always, carried a folder in his hand. He smiled faintly before sitting across from Hans. "Hans, we've been reviewing your reports," he said calmly. "The details you gave about Messerschmitt's jet program and fuel shortages, they check out." "You were right about the shortages being worse than we thought. Our intelligence missed that." Hans nodded slowly. He had no reason to lie anymore. The war had consumed enough lives. For the first time, he felt that perhaps his decision to defect had been the right one. Over the next few weeks, Hans became a valuable source of intelligence. He explained the nuances of German jet fighter designs, the production problems that crippled the Luftwaffe, and even the morale of the remaining German pilots during the war's final months. What shocked the Americans most was not the technology itself, but how close Germany had come to mass-producing jets that could have changed the air war. Hans described in detail the Me-262's incredible speed, its ability to outrun almost every Allied plane, and the frustration he felt when Hitler insisted on using them as bombers instead of interceptors. Watson listened carefully, sometimes taking notes himself. The more they spoke, the more Watson respected Hans. Not as an enemy, but as a fellow aviator who had been caught on the wrong side of history. But there was still the question of Hans's sabotage. Watson confronted him one evening after dinner. "Hans, when you defected, your engine was destroyed beyond repair. We know you did that deliberately. I need to understand why. Hans hesitated, looking down at his hands. If I had landed with a perfectly working engine, my comrades would have believed I planned it. They would have called me a traitor. I had to make it look like an accident, for their sake. There was a heavy silence in the room. Watson nodded slowly. You risked your life for that. Hans exhaled, relieved that someone finally understood. Yes, he said quietly. I had to choose between loyalty to my country and loyalty to the truth. The war was lost. I could not keep flying missions that would only kill more men for nothing. As the weeks turned into months, Hans's cooperation opened new doors. The Americans were now preparing a secret program to bring German scientists, engineers, and pilots to the United States. Operation Paperclip, as it was later called, was controversial but necessary. The Soviet Union was already capturing German technology and talent. America could not afford to fall behind. One morning, Watson called Hans to his office and handed him a sealed envelope. You've been cleared, Watson said. You're going to be part of our testing program. We want you to fly with us, legally this time. Hans was stunned. You mean, you want me to fly for the United States? Watson smiled. We want you to help us build the next generation of fighters. You've seen both sides of this war. That makes you uniquely qualified, Hans accepted, though not without hesitation. He knew that back in Germany his name was already being whispered as a traitor. But he also knew that staying would have meant either prison or death in Soviet hands. Working with the Americans gave him a chance to do something meaningful, perhaps even redeem himself in the eyes of history. When he climbed into the cockpit of an American test aircraft for the first time, he felt a strange mix of guilt and freedom. The same sky he had once fought under now stretched above him, but this time he was not flying to kill. He was flying to learn, to build, to move forward. Years later, declassified files would reveal the full story of Hans's defection. They showed not only his courage, but also the trust that had developed between him and Colonel Watson. It was a trust that went beyond war, beyond nations, the kind of trust that only two pilots who understood the cost of battle could share. Historians still debate whether Hans's actions were heroic or treasonous. But one thing is clear, his choice changed not just his own life, but the future of aviation. Without defectors like him, American engineers might have taken years longer to understand German jet technology. That delay could have reshaped the early Cold War, giving the Soviets an edge. When Hans was asked, late in his life, whether he regretted what he did, he gave a simple answer. I chose life over death. I chose truth over loyalty to a lie. If that makes me a traitor, then so be it. His words, captured in a rare interview, still resonate today. They remind us that war is not just fought with weapons, but with decisions. Decisions that carry a weight far heavier than any bomb. And perhaps that is why Hans's story still fascinates historians and aviators alike. Because in the end, he was not just a German pilot or an American asset. He was a man caught between two worlds, who chose a third path. A path that might just have helped shape the skies we fly in today. So what do you think? Was Hans a hero who prevented more needless deaths? Or a traitor who turned his back on his country in its final hour? Let me know in the comments. History is full of gray areas, but your opinion might just shed new light on one of the most extraordinary defections of World War II.